Welcome back to this week's Cattle Call. I'm Susan Littlefield on the Rural Radio Network. I'm on the road in our home studios right here in Lexington, Nebraska, and a great opportunity to meet up with some cattle guys over the last couple of days. And I've got some questions they wanted me to lob at Brad, and then lo and behold, they were already on Brad's list of things to talk about. So we're going to kind of dive into what's going on in this market. Heavy cattle, where's this cattle movement? How close to the knife are things? Big question. Are we at a bottom in this cattle market? We're going to kick it all off with what's going on in the cash. As you heard me mention him, Brad Kooima. He's with Kooima Kooima Varilek out of Sioux Center, Iowa. So let's talk cash. I mean, last week, everybody kind of held off, and they didn't. That 11th hour that everybody was talking about never actually really happened.
100% correct, Susan. Thanks for having me on again. Always fun to be on with you. I was going to ask you, is that all the awards that you've won lately in the background there, or all your holes in one?
That's the company. Those are our board of directors and different things. My awards are all at home.
Yeah. Well, you deserve them all.
Thank you.
So cash market, I thought if you want to rewind the tape just a little bit here, remember 2 or 3 weeks ago particularly 2 weeks ago, when there was a big interest, I thought, on the part of some of the majors, particularly, to seem like they wanted to accumulate cattle finally at that 180, 181 level, where it's like, okay, let's get as many of these bought as we can. And if you can get yourself to think a little bit like a packer, I guess if I was the packer and if I thought the market was bottoming and we were going to go higher, I'd want to have 2 or 3 or 4 weeks worth of inventory, right? Because you're afraid you're going to have to pay more. So sometimes that's a tip off when they get more aggressive and are willing to give days, they call it in the South. So I was hoping that was the indication, but we just needed to get up and get out of there a little bit. And I thought that's what we did last week. The sellers up here in the North in particular were very, resilient isn't the right word, stubborn. They did not, just bow to whatever steady bids were. In fact, Friday evening, really, more like 5:30, 6 o'clock, I was bid 184. Most of us passed. 184 would have been 2 to 3 higher. Okay, 181 to 2 is kind of where we traded the cattle of the week before that. So I thought that was very encouraging. I do know there are some cases where some of those cattle that did trade at 84 did get harvested as early as Monday and Tuesday of this week as well. So a quick turnaround. I think, you got a futures rally going this week so far. Yesterday was a nice day. Today's kind of a blasé deal, but we're holding our own. I think that should further give confidence to the feedlot that say, hey, let's ask higher. I think we'll be higher. I think we'll be 185 to 186 in the North, frankly. And as long as the feedlot stays a little bit resolute, there's the word I was looking for earlier, I think we can get that.
So are we, or has a bottom, can we say, been set in this cash cattle market?
Getting my opinion, of course, but that would certainly be my opinion. Yeah. The Fed is going to talk in 8 minutes. We've been talking about this now for 3 days, right? I don't know. What does that have to do with how many fat cattle there are? But there's always something out there. But if I had to just, dive into the cattle fundamentals the way I see it anyway, you've got a demand base that still continues to be pretty good. We've got through that first 2 weeks of September, which is always a slump period, and the meat in pretty good shape. I think you're going into less cattle, particularly in the South. And the North is still nice and current. We don't have those stories of those big 1,700-pound steers sitting around. So that's my thinking. I think we'll grind. It might not be like blink higher. We may grind a little higher, which would be also typical this time of year. But I think, too, we're going higher here.
So how much of the fund roll is still being played into this trade?
Well, I thought, we're officially done with the Goldman roll, but there's more than one fund out there. Goldman is the first 5 days of the month prior. So that did finish up Friday, but clearly we're getting some more residual of that, because the only month that's lower as you and I are doing this is the October, and it's down, not a lot, but down a little bit. And the back month's a little higher. So I think I'm going to call that some more fund roll. Because, if you know where cash is, I don't know, speculatively being short October at this kind of a discount doesn't seem like the greatest idea to me. Typically December cattle, actually, maybe not the last year and a half or so, but typically December cattle would carry a premium to the cash in September, because usually we're making that summer fall low, right? And we're anticipating better demand, tighter supply, and maybe even the risk of some winter. So December cattle to me look like they're maybe a little bit undervalued also.
We have a cattle on feed report that comes out on Friday. And of course, we're talking about this ahead of when those reports. some of the early thought predictions that you might have?
Well, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this cattle and feed report or any monthly cattle and feed report, frankly, because they have been not terribly accurate, not terribly useful at times. But, remember a year ago, we had a couple of real ugly placement reports in September and October and November, rather. It was for the months of September and October. So now you're sitting on a guess here of roughly 99% placements, okay, 1% less. There's one less marketing day than last year, but I couldn't help but think a little bit like a cattle guy, which I have a tendency to do because I am one. You can't place cattle unless you have an empty pen, right? And the gorilla in the room here has been these average weights, right? You hinted at it when we were doing the introduction. And the average weight's especially big in the formula states, Texas and Kansas. They, it seems, have consciously decided to hold cattle, make them bigger, allows the packer to harvest more pounds per animal, right? And maybe they felt like the feeder cattle replacements were too high. But anyway, I'm just thinking out loud, and it won't make any sense because the USDA sometimes doesn't always seem like the numbers make as much sense to me as it does to them. But if they're holding cattle, how are you going to have big placements if you got a pen full of cattle? I don't know. Let's go out on a limb and say maybe the placement number will surprise us this time, and maybe it'll be a little bit smaller than expectations. But don't bet the farm on that, I'm guessing.
So you talk about empty pens, and I just in my travels in the last couple of weeks, I've seen a lot more empty pens, at least in the north, compared to what we're seeing in the south. And you and I've had this kind of on repeat discussion about there just isn't the animals to put into it at this point.
Well, somebody's going to have to go without. I mean, we're going to have less cattle, and then people insist on building bigger yard specs, especially in the south. Some of that is somewhat seasonal, of course, too, in the north, where some of us are calf. We feed calves predominantly, so we put them on feed and say in October, feed them for 10 months, and then we haul manure and chop silage and start all over again the following month. So there is some seasonality to it, but I would agree to my experience across northeast Nebraska, especially. Wow. There's a lot of feed yards there that aren't even half full. So less cattle has got to mean the same, like you just said, some are going to have to go without here. And still remains the whole question of what's going to happen as we go into this fourth quarter. Are we going to finally start to see, the turn in this overall cattle cycle? A lot of people watching the same thing, and I'm working hard on this deal. The cow slaughter slowed way up compared to the last 2 years. Now are we going to see some of that retention of heifers? Would have been nice to have a July inventory report, huh? So we'd have a little more of a window on this whole matter. But I can't imagine that they're not going to save some, which means there's less yearlings available, which means there's less visible supply when we get to the first quarter. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
So how close to the knife are we going to be going into this last half of September?
I get kind of a mixed deal where we are going through this series of cooler cleanouts, maintenance, things like that they have to do regularly. They're picking this time to do it. A lot of places are. But, in one case, I know, those cattle I was referencing that were bid on Friday going right away. Some of these guys are real short bought. Usually that means we get a little more leverage, particularly while you're current, where you can maybe do like we did last week and said, you know what, we are going to take these steady bids. And I think that would be the same thing this year. Now, it really depends. There's a couple of those packers that are notorious for having a lot of inventory. They probably still do, but I think there's just as many that are short bought and will need to play this week.
All right. One final question for you as we head into the fall months. What are you hearing when it comes to like consumer demand, but kind of the hopes and dreams of these cattle producers out there?
If I could figure out demand, wow, we'd have a real radio show here, a program here. All I can do is look at what I see, and so every Tuesday there's this big report that talks about average retail prices. They break it down by cut, and there's like, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 cuts. Okay. I mean, it's stuff that most people don't even know what they're called. Right. And with the exception of like the 80s and the 90s, the hamburger cut grind, most of those cuts are at or below a year ago. I'm not crazy about that. Okay. I say that to the person that says, well, this stuff's just way too high. And I'm like, oh, it's not. It's the same retail price. Okay. But if demand was exceptionally good, like we had, coming out of the COVID thing, you sell it as high as you can sell it. That's capitalism, right? I mean, you don't throw it away, so you sell it as high as you can. And so, maybe demand the edges off of it a little bit. And how could you not be a little worried with the way the news is? I mean, the politics of the moment, all the rest. But generally, exports continue to be excellent. Demand is good enough, in my opinion. I think that you referenced what's the cattle guy thinking. I can tell you what this cattle guy's thinking, and I think a lot of them is okay, we went through 2014, we rinmowed the money through that deal. We had a 2014 like rally last year, right? All-time highs, just like we did then. And then in 15, the market just went thump. And we went down for almost 19 straight months, all the way into the December 16. So a lot of the cattle are going, well, I don't want to do that again. I am not going to let that happen to me again. So I think that the guy is a lot more cautious, more prone to sell it easier, all the rest, which I don't think is actually negative. I think that'll help keep us more current and keep us more, ready to react. So sorry, that was you asked for a drink and I gave you a fire hose there. Sorry.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. On this National Cheeseburger Day, if you're looking for something to have to cook for your family, let's grill up some great beef tonight. Real quick, how do folks get a hold of you, Brad?
712-722-0023 is the phone, or look us up on kkvtrading.com. And cheeseburgers is what we had for lunch today. So
perfect. Well, that's been this week's Cattle Call. Quick reminder, commodity futures and options do involve a substantial risk of loss, not suitable to all investors. And that's the Cattle Call on the Rural Radio Network.